If you are looking at your children and grandchildren and saying, if I make these decisions, their life is going to be worse than mine was. I'm going to take the privileges and advantages my parents gave me, and I'm going to give less of those to my children, who are then going to give less of those to my grandchildren. Then I don't care what kind of amazing things you're a part of, the kind of activism you're participating in. You are making the world a worse place.
Hi, welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I got something I want to interact with you guys a little bit about. I love some of the stuff that I'm seeing from Adam Lane Smith. He's the attachment kind of therapist guy, a believer. And he has just some really interesting takes on marriage and family that I really love to interact with. So we're going to look at two clips today. One is about no fault divorce. So he actually lays out, I think, one of the longer, more coherent cases against no fault divorce that I've heard. And so I want to play that for you guys and talk a little bit about that. And then he talks about this idea of sort of multi-generational trauma and how does a society heal from that? So we're gonna hit these two clips. I want to share with you guys a couple things about each one and kind of just drill into these ideas.
Policy number 2, can I be really controversial for a moment?
Please do, man.
I would end no fault divorce immediately. Specifically here in the United States, we have a policy for everyone overseas, a policy called no fault divorce, which just means that for any reason at any time you can just get divorced, you can just split up your marriage. I think that this is a misguided policy because it makes a marriage between two human beings. And I don't personally believe that a marriage has been or ever was between two human beings. It's an agreement that two people come together to co-found a legacy or co-found a family, largely is what marriage has always been for. And it's not for sex or romance or fun. It's actually for family and the cultivation of resources, of safety nets, say all kinds of things together. I don't think that we should just randomly flip apart marriages and shatter them. I think that that leads to massive, ugly custody battles. It leads to the dissolution of family wealth, crashing people down below safety nets. It leads to brokenness, children not knowing their fathers. It leads to bad things for mothers as well. No fault divorce is not good for anyone.
Okay, he's going to go deeper into his case here. So we'll listen to the rest of it. But I just wanted to just reflect for a second. So this is a very difficult topic for Western American people to understand. Why would we not want more freedom? So this kind of goes back to that constant sort of philosophical or theological belief that I reference a lot, which is that we live in a culture that has sort of by default almost accidentally decided that freedom is the highest value. And I think the reason why this happened was because it's the only value that as Americans we can all agree on. So that's the one thing that everyone can agree is a good thing. And I think freedom's a great thing, but it's not the best thing. But because it's the one sort of common denominator, it's right there. It's in the Declaration of Independence. We're all about freedom. It's in our national anthem. It's in our Pledge of Allegiance. Like, we are the land of the free. And so we've agreed this is such a high value. Now, I think freedom should be an extremely high value for the government, but it's not the highest value when it comes to living. Freedom is a necessary value that gives us the ability to pursue other more important things. So family is a way higher value than freedom. Love in a family unit is more valuable than freedom. But this is sort of where we're stuck as a culture. We are stuck thinking that freedom is the ultimate thing because we can't agree together to value anything else. And so somehow this has become so important that to most Americans, the idea of no fault divorce is sort of obviously a good thing. To be able to get out of an agreement that you made, a contract that you made, and you said, not just privately, but said publicly, and then got your faith community involved, and then got the government involved to reinforce the terms of the contract, which you said were till death do us part. That's what you said. And to say that we need to be able to dissolve that, either party could dissolve that at any time they want, for any reason they want. That's really no fault divorce. You can get out of that contract at any point, and there is no need to demonstrate a reason, a reasonableness for getting out of that contract. You can just simply dissolve it. This has been incredibly devastating And what Adam Lane Smith is describing here is if he could like sort of wave a magic wand and create one policy change in the United States, he would eliminate no fault divorce for the reasons that he's describing. That this is sort of the bedrock of what creates family in our society. And that one of the weird realities of no fault divorce is it didn't simply make it easier to get out of divorce. It changed the nature of marriage itself. And this is something that a lot of people, I think, struggle with, that when you live in a culture, we are a unified culture. So when a seismic event like the legalization of no fault divorce hits our culture, it changes definitionally the way that people think and feel about fundamental elements of society. And he's also saying that the inverse of that's also true. When you reinforce marriage, it's going to do something to society that's going to create a value system within the culture that's going to strengthen marriage and therefore protect children. And so that is something that yeah is very hard for us to see it and see that chain. We just say, well, these are individual decisions that people are making and giving them more and more freedom, which is what our society is all about. And the most important thing we could ever do is just provide more freedom for people. That simply doing that doesn't have any larger societal or cultural effects. And this is just simply wrong.
Have you ever considered starting a family business so you can spend more time working as a family team? We've started a year-long coaching program called Family Inc., where you get weekly coaching with Jeremy, access to our video training for launching family businesses, and lots of ideas for businesses to start that are working for other family teams. Head over to familyteams.com and click Family Inc. to learn more, or to set up a strategy call with Jeremy to see if this might be a good fit for you.
So let's go ahead and listen to the rest of what he has to say about this.
So if you're going to enter into a marriage contract, I believe that you should be held to it by larger society. But I do not think we're going to reverse this ship unless we treat marriage as an actual arrangement that is important instead of a fun little flippant thing you enter into for fun and sex.
I hear that strongly. Can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Yeah.
How much do you think the state or the government should be involved in marriage?
Good question. Ideally, I think it should be involved in marriage about 0%, honestly.
Okay.
Now, that's if you have a thriving community where families are interconnected and the bride and the groom, their families know each other and have for a long time, and their families are connected and their parents know each other and their grandparents know each other and everyone in the network knows each other. And there is social pressure upon them to treat each other with honesty and respect and kindness. If their kids will grow up and marry the neighbor's kids next door, if we have that level of connection, plus maybe like a religious connection where marriage is being treated as something very important, as a bond, as a sacrament. If you have social pressure with those people, then you do not need the state involved in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, it shouldn't be because the state should be minimal
Right.
at best. Okay. But we don't have that. So the state has stepped in 1,000 ways and replaced all of those networks that we've had. And we are now all in abusive relationships with the state. That's what the Western
Mhm.
world is. Okay. The state has replaced everything and abuses us as a result. We need to diminish that and restore the human connections and networks that actually we are designed for instead of the state superseding everything. That's my approach.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. One of the things that I think we should not take for granted is that it's obvious that the state ought to be involved in an institution like marriage. Is marriage essentially religious? I never really thought about this until I was in Israel, and we discovered that in Israel, the state is not involved in marriage because they have three religious communities that all have totally different ideas about marriage. They have, Islamic community. Over 20% of Israel is Arab. They have obviously the Jewish community, which also has the sort of secular Israelis as well as the Orthodox and ultra Orthodox, and they have very different views about marriage. And then you have the Christian communities within Israel. And so, in order to get married there, you have to be married by one of these religious institutions, and the state just sort of rubber stamps whatever the church or whatever the mosque, whatever the religious community says about that marriage. And in America, we have primarily a civil idea of marriage, that it's mostly done through the state, and that the state is largely responsible for upholding that contract like they would a business contract. And so this creates a huge political battle in our country around the theology of marriage, which is really unfortunate because why should the government be a part of a theological debate? But in this case, they are. And this is, I think, why Adam Lane Smith is saying ideally you wouldn't want them involved at all, but because children are involved, because there's so much property involved, and because there's so much confusion about this in our society, that the government sort of feels the necessity to be involved and to provide benefits and certain conditions under which this occurs. And so what happens is now the tail is wagging the dog. The government, which is really supposed to be the tail, right? It's supposed to sort of come on at the end and just sort of like help us possibly in the case where a marriage breaks down in some kind of major way. The government actually is now in the business of defining marriage theologically, and they are telling religious communities what marriage is. They're making these theological pronouncements now. And this has been really, really hard on marriage because you can say as a religious community, well, we don't really respect or acknowledge the government's decisions when it comes to our theological convictions about marriage. But one of the tough things that happens in our society is that so many of our cultural beliefs tend to be deeply influenced by our politics. And so, as the political winds shift and the government gets to a place where they increasingly believe something, it sort of drags along a huge percentage of society. And now you have Christians that are deeply confused about the nature of the theology of marriage and family because the government has made these decisions. So I think this is why it's just really important to understand the separation that he's describing there. The last one I want to share with you guys, this is I just love this conversation between Zuby and Adam Lane Smith. Check it out on YouTube or on podcast app because it's really a great conversation. They dive into something that I've heard Adam Lane Smith talk about before, and they unpack a little bit more, which is the generational trauma, sort of the attachment trauma that occurs within a culture. So one of the things that Adam Lane Smith has said before is that we really had after World War II an entire generation of traumatized men coming home, and many of them found it very difficult to attach to their children. And so he charts a lot of the problems that have happened generationally to that sort of original trauma. And I certainly saw this with my grandfather and people that went off to war. They just didn't talk about what they went through. Imagine going through the most traumatic experience of your life for years at a time at a very influential stage in your development and then refusing to talk about it for the rest of your life in any kind of meaningful way. The fact is that level of repression is going to have certain impacts. And one of those is often a lack of attachment. It can come out as anger. It can come out in a lot of unhealthy relational dynamics. The children raised by these men had a certain response towards fatherhood that was less than ideal as well. And so one of the things that Zuby starts to ask is, well, what do you do in this situation? I mean, it seems like you could have a traumatized generation, then traumatizing the next generation. And that this is just going to get worse and worse and worse until you just have an entire society of deeply unhealthy people where nobody even remembers what health looks like. And I love how Adam Lane Smith talks about this. And his answer is quite theological and I think and biblical. And I'd love to interact with it here.
Oh, yes. Oh, I love this. Thank you for bringing this up. I could take a stab at it because this has been my obsession. I'm on a personal quest to teach 1 billion people about secure attachment because if I could teach a billion, then that jumpstarts the process. Now, I wish I could claim that I invented this. I did not invent attachment theory. I wish I could claim that people will only get better if I teach them. Well, I hope that, but that's not the case. Nature heals, right? When a population is going through an ongoing stressor, they don't get better. But when we end that stressor and when we correct at least the environment where, okay, the stressor is gone, the beautiful thing about populations is that they start healing. In the Bible, it talks about when a curse will follow a generation down three generations out. That's what we seem to see is the dad has overwhelming extreme traumas from something, or his dad makes a horrifying decision that shatters the family. The next generation is screwed up. They're screaming, they're hitting each other, there's substance use, it's catastrophic. The next generation usually says, and here's an amazing thing a lot of humans do, I will at least be better than my parents, at least a little bit. And they pick one or two things they won't do, and they do a little bit better. The next generation says, I will do at least a little better than my parents. And they pick one or two things they won't do. And as they resolve down through the generations, eventually, provided that stressor is gone and that they have a little bit of time to heal, they reach a point where they are good, healthy, connected families again. And this idea of secure attachment and resolving conflict, all it is having the guts to talk to each other and trust that the other person is at least going to hear you out and care enough to work with you in a mutually fulfilling kind of way. That's all. People won't exploit me. At least my family will listen to me and we will try to work together toward a common good in a sustainable way. That's it. And humans reach that. Once we get broken and we start fixing again, we reach that equilibrium again. My goal is to speed that process up for a billion people across the earth and transmit that knowledge and say, look, here's what you were missing. Instead of waiting another 2 generations, here's your information now. Here's what to start doing. Let's jumpstart your process. But to do that, we need a lot of the stressors taken off of our relationships and our life. We need families to be encouraged to stay together again instead of encouraged to break up. We need risk factors and massive drug epidemics to go down so that people aren't dying in massive, overwhelming numbers. We need violent gangs who are intruding across in various nations across the earth and all kinds of war. We need to at least slow down so that populations can heal a little bit and be safe inside and play in a park. And then when families can play in a park, they can bond. And then they can spend that time pushing on the swings, playing, running, throwing a ball. Then they can bond with each other and build intra family networks, kith and kin networks, and build neighborhoods again.
Okay. So yeah, it's interesting the way he was ending that, really like kind of this Edenic picture of like being in a garden. And this is kind of like the way that human beings are really designed to interact. And this is what creates for ultimately healthy families where there's not constant stressors that create the kind of detachment that he's concerned about. But he's really kind of making an argument about the way that this happens across generations that I found really interesting, which is that in the Bible it says that when a generation decides to rebel against God, its impact really reverberates to the third and fourth generation. And his point there is that nature tends to heal. In other words, there's an equilibrium, or there's a way in which we were really designed to interact with each other. There's a loving kind of connection that is sort of natural to human beings. If you take away the stressors, then we tend back towards a place of more healthy relating. Now, I would say that those stressors never can be completely eliminated. We live in a time on this side of the garden, even if you were not to have the massive stressors of a world war that we're sending men off to fight and die and be traumatized in, you still have so much happening. And he's describing a lot of those dynamics there at the end. He says this, we got to take these stressors off. But one of the natures of the fall is that if you just give in to sin and to sinful patterns or sinful beliefs, those are going to bring stressors into your life. I mean, this is exactly what sin is. It's the decision to rebel against the natural way that God made the world in such a way that it's going to violate relationships, either relationships with other humans or with God himself. And that when you do this, it creates a generational cost that the next generation bears a cost. And that one of the most beautiful things that can ever happen in a multi-generational family is when one father and mother stand up and say, we're going to stop this in our generation. We're going to become more healthy. We're going to stay together for life. We're going to work things out. We're going to learn how to do healthy conflict. We're going to worship the Lord, and we're going to bring our family underneath the lordship of Christ. We're going to learn from Scripture the way that God designed family, and we're going to follow that biblical blueprint, and we're going to experience a lot of the positive elements. And this is the whole ethos of we want our ceiling to be our children's floor, and that we can heal from these 3 or 4 generational kind of patterns that happen.
Are you following us on Facebook and Instagram yet? Look up at Family Teams to get even more free content and never miss out on event announcements.
But I think one of the things that's really hard for people to totally accept is that you are often in the middle of one of these patterns. In other words, you are one of these 3 or 4 generations that you can't necessarily recover everything in your generation. Maybe there was just too much going on from the perspective of the kinds of challenges that you're facing, the kind of patterns that you face. You can overcome a lot of those things, pass a much better result to your children, who can then do the same for your grandchildren. And this is why when you start to think about family as a multi-generational project, as opposed to a one-generational project, you start to have the stamina for what actual progress looks like. And when you redefine all of reality as success is always an individual game, that we're playing a single player game, this really bleeds all the motivation out of the multi-generational project of saying, look, if my grandchildren have a substantially better life than I grew up with, then that is success. I can look at that and say, I have really done my part in helping to heal the world. And I think that's a very beautiful idea and one that we should embrace. And likewise, if you are looking at your children and grandchildren and saying, if I make these decisions, their life is going to be worse than mine was, that I'm going to take the privileges and advantages my parents gave me, and I'm going to give less of those to my children, who are then going to give less of those to my grandchildren, then I don't care what kind of amazing things you're a part of, the kind of activism you're participating in, you are making the world a worse place. You are taking the world that you were given and you are corrupting it for the next generation. And this is the way I think we need to just kind of honestly assess what progress looks like. And I think an obsession over our individual life, our individual story, oftentimes leads people to make the kinds of decisions that put a greater burden on the next. And likewise, if you are looking at your children and grandchildren and saying, if I make these decisions, their life is going to be worse than mine was, that I'm going to take the privileges and advantages my parents gave me, and I'm going to give less of those to my children, who are then going to give less of those to my grandchildren, then I don't care what kind of amazing things you're a part of, the kind of activism you're participating in, you are making the world a worse place than actually participating in this process of healing that he's describing, that he's trying to participate in by saying, I want to really get this word out to 1 billion people, which I think is an amazing vision, and I wish him the best. But I want to give you guys some of those thoughts. Like, what are some of these kind of macro ideas that are really impacting family life? No fault divorce, understanding generational trauma, and understanding our mandate to make the world and the next 2, 3 generations that we're going to get to interact with a better world for our children and our grandchildren and great grandchildren than even the one that we grew up with.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.